Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful Gossips 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The news broke still at first, like a distant grumble of thunder that no bone took seriously until the storm was formally above. Hope Logan had been arrested, charged with a crime so severe that indeed her closest abettors could slightly comprehend it. What began as whispers in courthouse hallways soon erupted into a media delirium that rocked Los Angeles. Cameras followed every step of her legal downfall, flashing relentlessly as if establishing the collapse of an American fairy tale. Hope, once the symbol of compassion and redemption, now stood indicted of orchestrating a ruinous fiscal crime that had allegedly led to multiple commercial defeats and severe profitable damage. The execution didn't just want captivity. They wanted the harshest discipline possible. And behind the scenes, a familiar name impended large over it all: Steffy Forrester. Steffy's involvement was no way intimately verified, but those closest to the situation felt her influence like an unnoticeable hand tensing around Hope's throat. The substantiation against Hope was inviting, but strangely precise, as if designed not simply to condemn her, but to abolish her. Financial records, non-public emails, falsified documents, and a ruinous digital trail painted Hope as the architect behind a scheme that she slightly understood herself. Yet Steffy, now holding enormous power within Forrester Creations and the megacity's nobility circles, had still orchestrated commodity far more dangerous than commercial warfare. She had finagled a legal trap so watertight that escape sounded insolvable. Hope's life changed in a single autumn. One moment she was preparing for another routine meeting about her fashion line, trying to rebuild her character after months of emotional strain. The coming, she was being attended out of the structure by law enforcement. Her name splashed across every major news outlet in the megacity. The demotion was immediate, but the fear set in after, when the graveness of the charges came clear. These weren't just allegations. They were allegations that could put her behind bars for the rest of her life. Some legal experts indeed rumored about the possibility of capital discipline, due to the disastrous fiscal consequences tied to the case. The Logan family was thrown into chaos. Brooke plotted to understand how her son could conceivably be connected to commodity so dark. Ridge, torn between fidelity and sense, tried to make sense of the mounting substantiation. Indeed, those who believed in Hope's innocence set up themselves questioning everything. The court of public opinion moved briskly than the factual justice system, and Hope was formally being ingrained as a villain. But behind unrestricted doors, Steffy felt no query. This wasn't just about business. This was particular. Times of resentment, treason, and undetermined contest had erected into commodity far more dangerous than wrathfulness. Steffy had watched Hope rise, fall, and rise again, always chancing a way to land on her bases. To Steffy, Hope represented everything she despised: moral superiority, emotional manipulation, and a pattern of snooping in Forrester family affairs. The rearmost conflict, involving control over major means within the company, had been the final straw. Steffy didn't want to beat Hope in the boardroom. She wanted her gone. What made Steffy's strategy so ruinous was its slyness. She no way directly indicted Hope. Rather, she planted information, nudged authorities in the right direction, and assured that indicting substantiation set up its way into the hands of the right people. She understood the system well enough to weaponize it without ever getting her hands dirty. Her thing wasn't just conviction, it was total destruction. Hope, now confined to a holding installation, felt her world shrinking. The walls sounded to close in with every fleeting hour. The weight of the charges pressed against her casket, making it hard to breathe. She replayed every moment of the once time, searching for commodity, anything that could explain how her life had entwined so far out of control. She knew she was innocent, but innocence didn't feel like protection presently. It felt like a fragile memory. Her legal platoon worked lifelessly, but the case was piled against her. The substantiation was sophisticated, complex, and deeply satisfying. Fiscal trails traced back to accounts in Hope's name. Emails appeared to show her coordinating illegal deals. Indeed, videotape footage, though vague and deficient, suggested her involvement in meetings that had led to disastrous issues for multiple companies. It felt less like indisquisition and more like an impeccably written script, one where Hope had been cast as the villain from the veritably morning. Meanwhile, Steffy watched everything unfold from a distance, her public image untouched. She expressed concern, offered polite statements to the press, and maintained her countenance as the megacity buzzed with reproach. To the outside world, she was simply another important superintendent witnessing a woeful fall from grace. But intimately, she was calculating her coming move. Because blackmail wasn't just part of the plan, it was the core of it. Steffy had uncovered commodity from Hope's history that no bone differently knew. A secret involving fiscal opinions made during a particularly vulnerable period in Hope's life. While the conduct themselves weren't felonious, they could fluently be twisted into commodity that looked far worse. Steffy used this information as influence, icing that anyone who might have witnessed in Hope's favor stayed silent. Business mates withdrew their support. Former abettors came distant. Indeed, musketeers began to misdoubt. Hope's insulation came nearly complete. The emotional risk was ruinous. Cut off from her children, separated from her family, and stripped of her character, Hope began to feel like a foreigner in her own life. Every day brought new captions, new allegations, and new swells of judgment. The woman who formerly stood for kindness and remission was now being portrayed as a cold wave, calculating, felonious. Yet beneath the fear and prostration, a spark of determination still burned. Hope refused to accept that her story would end in a courtroom. She knew someone was behind this. She could feel it. The perfection of the substantiation, the timing of the allegations, the unforeseen collapse of her support system, it all refocused to manipulation. And deep down she knew exactly who had the motive, the means, and the occasion. Steffy. As the trial date approached, the stakes grew, indeed advanced. Prosecutors suggested that they would pursue the maximum possible judgment. The expression death row began circulating in legal circles, not inescapably in the non-fictional sense, but as a symbol of total unrecoverable discipline. Hope wasn't just facing captivity. She was facing the end of everything she had erected. The emotional pressure on Brooke was unsupportable. Watching her son be treated like a felonious shattered her. She prayed Ridge to help, to use his influence to dig deeper. But Ridge was trapped between two families, two commitment, and a verity that felt decreasingly delicate to uncover. Meanwhile, Steffy tensed her grip. She reached out to crucial substantiations, reminding them of what she knew. Subtle pitfalls were disguised as professional advice. Careers were put at threat. Reports were still held hostage. Steffy didn't need to raise her voice. Her power spoke for her. Hope's legal platoon eventually uncovered a small inconsistency in the substantiation. One sale that didn't relatively align with the rest of the narrative. It was minor, but it offered a splinter of stopgap. Crack in the wall. With enough pressure, that crack could come a doorway. But Steffy anticipated this. She responded by releasing fresh substantiation, indeed more dangerous than ahead. Suddenly, the inconsistency didn't matter. The case against Hope grew stronger, darker, and more satisfying. Public opinion shifted indeed further against her. Hope felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. The nights were the hardest. Alone in her cell, she replayed recollections of her children's horse laugh, her family's support, and the life she formerly believed was secure. Now everything felt fragile. Every sound echoed too loudly. Every study felt heavier than the last. Yet indeed in the darkness, Hope refused to give up. She began writing letters to her children, to her family, to herself. She reminded herself of who she was, not who the caption said she was. She held on to the belief that verity, no matter how buried, had a way of surfacing. The question was whether it would surface in time. Steffy, on the other hand, felt no guilt. To her this was justice. Hope had obtruded in her life, her family, and her business too numerous times. This was an atrocity, it was check. Or so she told herself. But power has a way of distorting reality. As the trial neared, cracks began to form in Steffy's precisely constructed world. A former associate, formerly pious, began asking questions. A non-public train went missing. A digital trail, formerly hidden, started to resurface in unanticipated places. Hope's legal platoon tasted a shift. They dug deeper, following leads that refocused not to Hope, but to someone differently pulling the strings. The name Steffy Forrester started appearing in places it shouldn't have. Not as a suspect but as a facilitator. The substantiation wasn't enough yet, but it was growing. Hope's fate still hung in the balance. One wrong move could seal her future ever. But for the first time since her arrest, there was a sense that the story might not end in tragedy. The courtroom would soon come the battleground where verity, power, and revenge collided. And whether Hope would walk free or face the ultimate discipline would depend on who could expose the verity before it was too late. The morning of the pre-trial hail arrived with a suffocating heaviness that sounded to press against the entire megacity of Los Angeles. Outside the courthouse, journalists gathered in clusters, their cameras aimed at the way where Hope Logan would soon appear. Her name trended across every news platform, framed by captions that painted her as either a departed angel or a calculating miscreant. The verity felt inapplicable in a world driven by spectacle. What signified now was the story, and the story had formerly been written by forces far more important than Hope herself. Inside the holding area, Hope sat in silence, her hands folded tightly in her stage. The sterile walls reflected the emptiness she felt outside. Each breath felt deliberate, as though her body had to be reminded how to serve. She had spent weeks in confinement, cut off from the life she formerly knew, watching her character deteriorate from a distance. The woman who had formerly been the face of stopgap and moral clarity was now reduced to an exemplary tale, a warning of how snappily grace could turn into disgrace. Her legal platoon moved with urgency, carrying thick flyers filled with substantiation, counterarguments, and last-nanosecond strategies. They believed in her innocence, but belief alone wasn't enough to strike a case that had been strictly drafted to destroy her. Every document, every fiscal record, every suspicious dispatch had been arranged to form a narrative that placed Hope at the center of a massive commercial reproach. The execution wasn't just aiming for a conviction. They were aiming to make an illustration out of her. The public didn't see the quiet moments. They didn't see Hope gaping at the ceiling at night, replaying recollections of her children's horse laugh, wondering if she'd ever hold them again. They didn't see the letters she wrote but no way transferred, the prayers she rumored when the lights went out, or the silent gashes she wiped down before anyone could notice. To the world she was a caption. To herself, she was a mama fighting not to be cancelled. Across city, Steffy Forrester prepared for another day at Forrester Creations, her life continuing with the same polished perfection it always had. Her office overlooked the megacity, a symbol of the power she had fought to cover. From the outside everything appeared normal. Meetings were listed, deals were negotiated, and the business of fashion carried on. But beneath the face, Steffy's attention remained fixed on one thing: icing that Hope Logan no way walked free. Steffy had spent times learning how to control narratives, how to impact issues without leaving fingerprints behind. This case was no different. She understood the legal system well enough to know where to apply pressure and when to stay silent. Her blackmail tactics were subtle but effective. A memorial then. Trouble there. Careers, reports, and fiscal futures hung in the balance for anyone who considered stepping out of line. Yet indeed Steffy couldn't control everything. The former associate who had begun asking questions was getting a serious problem. He'd been near enough to the fiscal dealings at the heart of the case to fate patterns that didn't make sense. The substantiation against Hope was too perfect, too clean, too precisely arranged. Real crimes were messy. This one looked like it had been designed. He started digging. Digital records that were supposed to be buried began to resurface. Metadata from crucial documents revealed timestamps that didn't align with Hope's schedule. Fiscal transfers traced back not to Hope's direct conduct, but to interposers with strong ties to Forrester Creations. The deeper he looked, the clearer it came that Hope had been framed not clumsily, but consummately. Meanwhile, the execution doubled down. They presented new expert analyses, fiscal models, and cerebral biographies that painted Hope as a calculating architect. The courtroom atmosphere grew darker with every session. The possibility of a life-ending judgment, whether non-fictional or emblematic, impended over the case like a storm pall that refused to move. Hope's family plotted to stay united under the pressure. Brooke's health began to suffer from the constant stress. Ridge set up himself torn between fidelity to his son and the uncomfortable reality that the substantiation refocused away. Musketeers who formerly stood by Hope grew quieter, doubtful of what to believe. Insulation came Hope's new reality. But in insulation, clarity frequently follows. Hope began to notice patterns in the way the case was being handled. Certain names appeared constantly in documents. Certain substantiations sounded rehearsed. Certain pieces of substantiation arrived at moments that felt distressfully accessible. Her instincts, stoned by times of navigating emotional and professional chaos, told her that this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a calculated takedown. The name that echoed in her mind was Steffy. Steffy had the motive. Steffy had the coffers. And Steffy had a history of turning particular conflicts into strategic wars. What Hope demanded was proof. The turning point came still without fanfare. A non-public train was anonymously delivered to Hope's legal platoon. Inside were dispatches that suggested manipulation of crucial substantiations, fiscal impulses disguised as consulting freights, and strategic collaboration that refocused directly to Steffy's inner circle. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was the strongest lead they had entered since the case began. For the first time in months, stopgap flitted. The legal platoon moved snappily, filing movements to probe implicit misconduct. The execution defied, claiming the substantiation was particular and inapplicable. But the seed of mistrustfulness had been planted. The judge, under growing public scrutiny, allowed a limited review of the new information. Steffy felt the shift incontinently. Her sources advised her that the narrative was starting to crack. Questions were being asked. Lines were being drawn. The precisely constructed story she had erected was no longer as solid as it formerly was. She responded the only way she knew how, by tensing her grip. Further pressure was applied to substantiations. Further influence was wielded behind the scenes. She reminded people of what they stood to lose if they forgot where their fidelity lay. But power, when overused, leaves traces. And those traces were beginning to lead back to her. Hope tasted the change indeed from her confined position. The air felt different. The legal exchanges sounded less hopeless. Her attorneys spoke with conservative sanguinity, careful not to promise anything, but no longer hiding their belief that the verity could still crop. Still, the peril remained veritably real. The execution prepared its final arguments, framing Hope as a symbol of commercial rapacity and moral decay. They emphasized the scale of the damage, the number of lives affected, and the need for severe consequences. The expression "maximum penalty" echoed through the courtroom like a trouble sculpted in gravestone. The public remained disunited. Some saw Hope as a woeful figure caught in a web of power struggles. Others saw her as an exemplary tale of ambition gone wrong. Social media debates raged, with opinions shifting by the hour. Through it all, Hope held on to one thing: her sense of tone. She refused to let the allegations define her. She continued to write, to reflect, to flash back who she was before the world turned against her. Her strength didn't come from certainty, it came from adaptability. And adaptability, unlike power, can't be taken down. The former associate, now working discreetly with Hope's legal platoon, uncovered a critical piece of substantiation. A fiscal sale that had been routed through multiple shell companies led directly to an account controlled by a Forrester attachment. The timing of the sale matched a crucial moment in the alleged crime. The recrimination was clear: someone differently had orchestrated the fiscal movements attributed to Hope. The threat of exposing this information was enormous. But the verity demanded to be heard. When the substantiation was presented, the courtroom atmosphere shifted dramatically. The execution plotted to explain the connection. The defense seized the occasion, questioning the integrity of the entire case. Mistrustfulness, formerly suppressed, now spread like campfire. Steffi watched the news content with a tensing jaw. Her name wasn't mentioned yet, but she could feel the limelight turning. The story she had written was being rewritten, and she no longer controlled the narrative. Behind unrestricted doors, fear began to surface. She considered her options. Retreat wasn't an option. Confession was unbelievable. Her only choice was to outthink the growing trouble. But indeed, the most important players make miscalculations. A non-public communication meant for one of Steffi's abettors was interdicted. It contained instructions that explosively suggested substantiation manipulation. The wording was careful, but the intent was unmistakable. This time the substantiation couldn't be ignored. The judge ordered a deeper disquisition into possible hindrance in the case. The execution's confidence wavered. The defense pressed harder. Hope's future, formerly putatively sealed, now hung in a fragile balance. She remained in guardianship, but her spirit felt lighter than it had in months. The possibility of justice, still distant, was real again. Steffy's world began to close in. Associates reseated themselves. Counsels prompted caution. The same influence that formerly defended her now drew attention to her every move. Power, when hovered, becomes visible. The megacity watched as the story shifted from Hope's contended crimes to the question of who had framed her. The trial was no longer just about guilt. It was about verity. And verity, formerly unleashed, has a way of demanding responsibility. Hope stood at the center of the storm, not as a villain, but as a woman fighting to reclaim her life from forces that had tried to abolish her. Her fate was still uncertain, but for the first time since the agony began, the future felt like commodity she might still be allowed to have.